Alina was the kind of girl who usually sat in the back row, hoping the ground would just open up and swallow her whole. She wasn't popular, and she wasn't a troublemaker. She was just there, in a high school filled with loud laughter, shouting in the hallways, and kids showing off their new phones or sneakers. Alina was a shadow. She always wore the same old faded blue hoodie, zipper stuck halfway up, and her jeans were usually a little too short, showing her socks when she sat down. Her family didn't have much money. Her dad worked 2 jobs fixing cars, and her mom cleaned houses in the rich part of town. There was never any extra cash for piano lessons or fancy hobbies, but Alina had a secret. It was a secret that kept her going when the days felt too long and the nights felt too lonely. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, when the final bell rang and everyone rushed out to the buses or to football practice, Alina would hang back. She would wait in the library until the librarian, Mrs. Gable, packed her bag and left for the day. Once the coast was clear, Alina would sneak down the hallway to the old music room. It was at the very end of the school, right next to the boiler room. Nobody ever went there anymore because the heater was always too loud, making a weird clanking sound. Inside that room, the far corner covered in a thick layer of dust, sat an old upright piano. It was ugly. The wood was scratched, and some of the keys were yellowed like old teeth. But to Alina, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. Alina didn't know how to read music. She couldn't tell a treble clef from a hole in the wall. But she had something else. She had ears. She could hear a song once on the radio and remember exactly how it went. Her fingers just seemed to know where to go. It started when she was 12, tapping on the kitchen table while her mom cooked dinner. Her mom had laughed and said, "You have a rhythm in you, girl." Sitting at that old piano after school was the only time Alina felt like she was actually good at something. When she played, she didn't worry about her ripped shoes or the math tests she failed. She just closed her eyes and let her hands fly over the keys. The music would fill the small, dusty room, and for a few minutes Alina wasn't the poor girl from the wrong side of town. She was a musician. Then, one Monday morning, the announcement came over the loudspeaker. The principal's voice crackled through the speaker, talking about the annual Winter Talent Showcase. He said that anyone could sign up, not just the band or choir students. He made a big speech about school spirit and sharing your gifts. Alina sat in her homeroom, staring at the bulletin board across the room. A colorful flyer was taped there. Asterisk, Talent Showcase. Friday night, prizes for the winners. Asterisk. "Hey, look at that," whispered Jessica, a girl who sat at the desk in front of Alina. "They're giving $50 to the winner of the solo category. $50. Alina's heart did a little flip. $50 would mean she could buy her own lunch for a month instead of bringing a soggy paper bag. Or she could buy a new pair of gloves without holes in the fingers. But more than the money, she just wanted to play. She wanted to play on a real stage, just once. Her friend Tomas, who sat next to her in history, caught her looking at the flyer. He grinned. "You should do it, Alina." Alina shook her head quickly, her face getting hot. "No way, I can't." "Why not?" Tomas asked. "I've heard you humming before. You've got a good voice." "I don't sing," Alina mumbled. I mess around on the piano in the old music room." Tomas's eyes went wide. "You play. Since when?" "Since forever, but I'm not good. Not like the kids in band." Tomas tapped his pencil on his desk. "So what? The flyer says anyone. You don't have to be a genius. Just go up there and do your thing. I bet you're better than you think." Alina spent the rest of the day thinking about it. The idea scared her to death. Her palms got sweaty just imagining standing in the spotlight with hundreds of eyes staring at her. But the thought of that grand piano on the big stage, the one that was actually tuned and sounded shiny and new, was too tempting to resist. She dreamed of what it would feel like to press those keys and hear the sound fill the huge gymnasium by lunchtime. Her feet were moving before her brain could stop them. She walked to the sign-up sheet taped to the wall in the main hallway. There were only a few names on it. Asterisk Jason Miller guitar. Emily Wong violin, the cheerleading squad dance routine. Alina looked around to make sure nobody was watching. She pulled a pen out of her paquita cheap blue pen that was running out of ink, canned in her messy handwriting. She wrote Elena Rodriguez piano. The moment the ink was dry, she felt sick to her stomach. What had she just done? She couldn't read music. She didn't have a song prepared. She was going to make a fool of herself in front of the whole school. She tried to sneak away. But as she turned, she bumped into a hard surface. It wasn't a wall. It was a person, Mrs. Sterling. Mrs. Sterling was the music teacher. She was a tall, sharp woman who always wore black and smelled like strong perfume and chalk dust. She ruled the music department with an iron fist. She only liked two kinds of students: the ones who could read sheet music perfectly, and the ones whose parents could afford to buy them expensive instruments. Mrs. Sterling looked down her nose at Elena over her glasses. "Can I help you, Elena?" she asked, her voice cold and tight. She didn't even look at the sign-up sheet yet. "I was just looking," Elena stammered. Stepping back, Mrs. Sterling glanced at the paper. Her eyes landed on Elena's name. A look of pure annoyance crossed her face, like she had just smelled something rotten. "Piano? You are signing up for piano?" Elena nodded, clutching her backpack straps. "Yes, Mrs. Sterling. I've never seen you in band. I've never seen you in choir. I have never seen you in my classroom," Mrs. Sterling said, crossing her arms. "Who taught you to play?" "I taught myself, ma'am." "Just a little."
Ow.
Mrs. Sterling let out a short, sharp laugh that wasn't funny at all. It was a mean laugh. "Self-taught. How wonderful. But let me tell you something, Elena. This is a talent showcase, not a make-noise show. Do you know what an arpeggio is? Do you know what legato means?" Elena's face burned. She didn't know those words. "No, ma'am. Exactly. This event is to showcase the talent of this school, students who have dedicated their time to learning their craft properly. It is not for amateurs who bang on keys in the cafeteria." "I promise I'll practice," Elena said, her voice shaking. "I really love to play," Mrs. Sterling sighed, looking at her watch as if Elena was wasting her valuable time. "Fine, you signed up, so you're in. But don't think I'm going to go easy on you just because you're a beginner. If you are going to take up a spot on that stage, you are going to do it correctly. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Elena whispered. "Be at the first rehearsal tomorrow after school in the auditorium. Sharp. Don't be late." Elena watched Mrs. Sterling walk away, her high heels clicking loudly on the floor. The excitement Elena had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a heavy knot in her stomach. She felt like she had just made a terrible mistake. But she had signed her name. She couldn't back down now. The rest of the day dragged on forever. Elena sat in her classes, not hearing a word the teacher said. All she could think about was the piano. Her heart told her she could do it, that music wasn't about rules or big words. Music was about feeling. But Mrs. Sterling's voice echoed in her head, telling her she was an amateur, telling her she didn't belong. That night, after dinner, while her dad slept in his armchair and her mom folded laundry in the living room, Elena sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. She drew little black dots on lines, trying to make them look like the music she had seen in books. It didn't make any sense. She ripped the page out and crumpled it up. She didn't need the dots. She just needed to hear the music in her head and let her fingers find it. She closed her eyes and imagined the stage, the lights, and the sound of the piano. She took a deep breath. She was scared, really scared. But for the first time in her life, she was going to try to be seen. The sun was barely up the next morning when Elena's eyes snapped open. She hadn't slept well. Her dreams had been a jumbled mess of flying musical notes and giant rulers hitting her hands. Today was the day. The first rehearsal. She pulled the covers up to her chin, trying to hide from the world for just 5 more minutes. The thought of facing Mrs. Sterling again made her stomach feel like it was tied in a giant, tight knot. But she knew she couldn't stay in bed. She had promised herself she would try. At school, the hallway seemed louder than usual, but Elena felt like she was walking underwater. Everything was muffled and far away. She kept her head down, staring at her sneakers as she walked. By the time the final bell rang, signaling the end of the day, her heart was beating so hard she could feel it thumping against her ribs. She walked slowly toward the auditorium. It was a separate building connected to the main school by a long glass hallway. As she got closer, she could hear noises tuning instruments, the squeak of shoes on the wooden stage, and the sharp voice of Mrs. Sterling barking orders. Alina pushed open the heavy double doors and stepped inside. The auditorium was huge and dark, except for the bright stage lights. It smelled like old velvet, floor wax, and dust. Up on stage, the real music students were gathered. They were tuning violins, polishing trumpets, and chatting in groups. They looked confident. They looked like they belonged there. Alina looked down at her faded jeans and worn-out hoodie. She felt like a stranger who had walked into a party she wasn't invited to. She stood near the back of the room, hoping to be invisible. But Mrs. Sterling had eyes like a hawk. She was standing in the center of the stage with a clipboard in one hand and a baton in the other. She looked up, scanning the faces of the students, and her eyes locked right onto Alina. "You are late," Mrs. Sterling said. Her voice boomed through the room, silencing the chatter of the other students. "We started 3 minutes ago." "I'm sorry," Alina whispered, stepping onto the stage. Her legs felt like lead weights. "What?" "I was coming from the other side of the school." Mrs. Sterling checked something off on her clipboard, not looking up. "We don't have time for excuses. We have a show to put on, and we have limited time to prepare. Find your place." Alina stood there, confused. "My place? I don't have a chair or a music stand." Mrs. Sterling looked up over her glasses and sighed, a long, dramatic sound that made the other students snicker. "You are the pianist. You go to the piano." She pointed the baton toward the huge, black, grand piano sitting center stage. "And don't scratch the finish. That instrument costs more than your house." A few kids giggled. Alina felt her face turn hot red. She walked toward the piano. It was massive. It was shiny black and reflected the stage lights like a mirror. It looked terrifying. It was nothing like the friendly beat-up upright in the old music room. This piano looked like a beast waiting to bite her. She sat down on the bench. It was hard and cold. The keys were white and smooth, looking at her like rows of teeth. Mrs. Sterling tapped her baton against a music stand. "All right, since we have a new addition to the program today, we are going to start with a little screening. I need to see if you are actually going to be able to play or if I need to cut you from the list." The room went silent. All eyes were on Alina. A boy holding a cello smirked at her. Alina's throat went dry. Now Mrs. Sterling continued, walking closer to the piano. "Don't play that rubbish you play on the radio. Show me something classical. Play a scale. Let's start with C major. Both hands. Up and down." Alina stared at the keys. A scale. She knew what a scale sounded like, but she didn't know which notes to press exactly. She knew where the C was, the white key just to the left of the two black keys. She found it and pressed down. "Go on," Mrs. Sterling snapped. Alina took a deep breath and started to play. She pressed the white keys, moving her fingers to the right. It didn't sound terrible, but it wasn't smooth. Her fingers stumbled a bit over each other. When she got to the top of the keyboard, she tried to come back down, but her timing was off. It sounded clunky and amateur. She stopped and pulled her hands back into her lap, ashamed. Mrs. Sterling didn't say anything for a moment. She just stared at Alina. Then she let out a laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh you make when you see a dog walk on its hind legs, musing, but mostly sad. "That," Mrs. Sterling said, waving her hand at the piano, "was not a scale. That was a disaster. You play like you are wearing mittens. Do you even know where middle C is?" Alina nodded, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. "Yes, ma'am. Then why can't you find it with your eyes closed?" A real pianist knows their instrument. You treat it like a toy? Mrs. Sterling turned to the other students. "This, everyone, is what happens when you don't practice. This is what happens when you think talent is enough. It isn't." Lena wanted to run. She wanted to jump off the stage and run all the way home. But she was frozen. "Play something else," Mrs. Sterling commanded. "Play a song. Anything." Lena's hands were shaking, but she knew she had to play something to show them she wasn't useless. She closed her eyes for a second to block out Mrs. Sterling's glare. She thought of the song she played on the old piano, the song that made her feel safe. It was a slow, sad melody she had made up herself. She started to play. It wasn't Mozart or Beethoven. It was simple and raw. Because she was so nervous, she hit the keys a little too hard at first, making a jarring sound. But then she settled into the rhythm. For a moment, the auditorium was quiet. The song was beautiful in a strange, lonely way. It was the sound of how she felt. Just as the song was about to build up, Mrs. Sterling yelled, "Stop!" Alina jumped, her hands flying off the keys. The music cut off instantly. "Enough," Mrs. Sterling said, rubbing her temples as if she had a headache. "That is not music. That is just noise. There is no structure. There is no theory. It is just a random collection of sounds." "I made it up," Alina said quietly. "It's how I feel." Mrs. Sterling walked right up to the piano bench, looming over Alina. "We are not here to talk about your feelings, Alina. We are here to perform a concert. People pay to hear skill, not your teenage angst." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick black book of sheet music. She slammed it down on the music stand in front of Alina. The book flopped open to a page filled with tiny, black notes that looked like ants swarming on the paper. "This," Mrs. Sterling said, tapping the page with a long fingernail, "is what you will play for the showcase. If you still want to be in it, that is." Alina looked at the page. It was terrifying. The notes were packed so close together, there was barely any white space left. At the top of the page, it said, *Frederick Chopin, Etude in C minor. Op. 10. No. 12. *I can't read this, Alina said, panic rising in her chest. "I don't know what these notes are." "Not my problem," Mrs. Sterling said coldly. She crossed her arms. "You signed up for the piano category. That implies you are a pianist. A pianist can read music. If you cannot read this, then you should not have signed up. You are wasting my time and everyone else's." Alina looked at the other kids. Some of them wouldn't look at her, staring at their shoes. Others were whispering and laughing. She felt trapped. But I memorize things by listening. Can't I play something else? "No," Mrs. Sterling said. "If you want to be on my stage, you will play this piece. It is a standard. It requires technique, dynamics, and speed. If you manage to learn it, maybe, just maybe, you won't embarrass yourself completely." Mrs. Sterling knew exactly what she was doing. She knew Alina couldn't read music. She knew this piece was one of the hardest pieces a high school student could attempt. It was famous for being fast and difficult. She was setting Alina up to fail. She wanted Alina to quit so Mrs. Sterling wouldn't have to deal with a street kid ruining her perfect concert. "Oh, and one more thing," Mrs. Sterling added, turning to walk away. She stopped and looked back over her shoulder. "See this piano? It is the Steinway Model D. It is a very sensitive instrument. The action is heavy. The keys are stiff. You need to have strong fingers to get a sound out of it. That old upright in the practice room is like a toy compared to this. If you can't control this piano, nobody will hear you." She walked back to the center of the stage and clapped her hands. "All right, everyone. Break is over. Jason, get your trumpet ready. Alina, you may stay and practice, but please try to keep the noise down." For the next hour, Alina sat at the giant piano while the other students practiced their pieces around her. She stared at the sheet music. It looked like a foreign language. She tried to put her fingers on the keys where the first note was, but her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't keep them steady. She pressed a key, then another. It sounded nothing like music. It sounded like a mistake. Every time she made a mistake, she felt Mrs. Sterling's eyes burning into her back. The teacher wasn't even looking at her, but Alina could feel her judgment. Eventually, Sterling called an end to the rehearsal. "Same time tomorrow," she announced. "And Alina, I expect to hear at least the first 10 bars of the Chopin piece tomorrow. If you can't do it, I'm taking your name off the list." The students packed up their instruments and chatted loudly as they left the stage. Alina sat alone on the bench. The piano in front of her felt like a wall she couldn't climb over. She looked at the door where the O. The next few days were the longest of Alina's life. The excitement she had felt in the library about finding a way to listen to the music quickly faded, replaced by a cold, hard reality. The piece Mrs. Sterling had given her wasn't just hard. It was a monster. Alina spent hours in the library with the old headphones on, listening to the song over and over again on the computer. It was fast. It was aggressive. The left hand moved up and down the keyboard in waves of sound that made Elena's head spin. It sounded like a storm, but a beautiful one. She tried to memorize the sounds, but they were too complex. There were too many notes happening at the same time. When she went to the music room after school, she tried to copy what she had heard. But the old upright piano was too different from the grand piano. The keys were loose and easy to press. She could play fast on the old piano, but it sounded sloppy. When she tried to play the complicated parts, her fingers got tangled up like spaghetti. She would start a phrase, mess up one note, and have to stop. Then she would start again, and again, and again. The worst part was the rehearsals with Mrs. Sterling. Every afternoon, Selena had to walk onto that stage and face the music. Literally. The other students were getting better. The trumpet player was hitting his high notes. The violinists were playing in harmony. They were a team. Alina was just alone on a giant bench. On Wednesday, Mrs. Sterling stopped the entire band just to criticize Alina. Stop. Stop everything. Mrs. Sterling shouted, cutting off the violin section in the middle of a song. The room went silent. She walked over to the piano and loomed over Alina. Alina, what does that sound? You are playing the correct rhythm, maybe, but it has no power. The Chopin etude is called the Revolutionary for a reason. It is supposed to sound like a war. You are playing it like a lullaby. You are barely touching the keys. I'm trying, Alina said, her voice small. My hands hurt. Your hands hurt? Mrs. Sterling laughed. She grabbed Elena's hands and held them up. Look at these soft hands. You don't have the strength for this instrument. A real pianist has calluses. A real pianist practices for hours a day. You think you can just waltz in here with your feeling and play this? You are disrespecting the composer. Elena pulled her hands away. She wanted to shout back, to tell her that she was practicing. She stayed up until midnight trying to get the notes right. But the words stuck in her throat. She just looked down at the keyboard. If you cannot play louder than a whisper, I might as well put a microphone in front of you, Mrs. Sterling continued. But I won't, because you don't deserve it. Tomorrow, I want to hear dynamics. Loud, soft, not just one boring volume. The next day was even worse. It was raining outside, a cold, gray rain that made the school feel damp and sad. Alina was tired. She had stayed up too late listening to the song again, trying to separate the left hand from the right hand in her head. When she got to rehearsal, Mrs. Sterling was in a foul mood. She took one look at Alina and frowned. Why are you wearing that hoodie? We are performing here. Dress like a performer. Alina looked down at her clothes. It's cold. Put the hood down. You look like a thug, Mrs. Sterling snapped. Alina took the hood down, feeling her face burn with shame. She sat at the piano. The grand piano felt even colder than usual. The air conditioning in the auditorium was blasting, and the stage lights were off, making the room feel like a cave. Let's run through the program, Mrs. Sterling announced. Alina, you will go last. Just so we can get the good performances out of the way first. The other students snickered. Alina gripped the edges of the bench until her knuckles turned white. She played through the song as best as she could. She made mistakes, lots of them. Her fingers slipped on the ivory keys because she was nervous. Every time she missed a note, she winced, waiting for Mrs. Sterling to yell. When she finished, there was no applause. There was just silence. Mrs. Sterling didn't yell. She just sighed a long, tired sigh. That was painful, Elena. Truly painful. You are not ready. You are not even close to being ready. If you play like that on Friday night, the audience is going to walk out. Do you want that? Alina shook her head. Then fix it, Mrs. Sterling said, turning her back. Rehearsal is over. I'm going home. You can stay and practice, but honestly, I don't know why you bother. You can't teach talent. Mrs. Sterling walked off the stage, her heels clicking sharply. She turned off the main stage lights, leaving only the dim emergency exit lights glowing at the back of the room. Then she left. Alina sat in the dark. The auditorium was huge and empty, and it felt like the walls were closing in on her. She looked at the sheet music. The black notes seemed to be dancing on the page, mocking her. She tried to play the first line again. Clunk. Wrong note. She tried again. Clunk. She hit the keys harder, angry at herself, angry at Mrs. Sterling, angry at the piano. Bang, bang, bang. It sounded terrible. It sounded like noise. Suddenly, Alina slammed the lid of the piano down. The sound echoed through the hall like a gunshot. She stood up, knocking the bench over. I hate this. She screamed into the dark room. Her voice was shaky and cracked. I hate this stupid song. I hate this stupid piano. She grabbed her backpack and stormed off the stage, tears streaming down her face. She didn't care if the janitor heard her. She didn't care about anything anymore. She was done. That night at home, Alina didn't eat dinner. Her mom asked her if she was feeling okay, but Alina just mumbled something about a headache and locked her bedroom door. She lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling. The anger had faded away, leaving behind a heavy, empty feeling of defeat. She thought about Mrs. Sterling's face, the smirk, the way she looked at Alina's hands, the way she called her music noise. Mrs. Sterling was right, Alina thought. Who was she kidding? She wasn't a pianist. She was just a girl who liked to make noise on an old instrument. She had no place on that stage. She was going to humiliate herself in front of the whole school, and then everyone would laugh at her. Even Tomas. She pulled her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms around them. She felt small. She felt like giving up was the only smart thing to do. It wasn't worth the stress. It wasn't worth the tears. The next morning, Alina woke up with a plan. She was going to quit. She had made up her mind. She walked to school with a heavy heart, but she also felt a tiny bit of relief. At least the fighting was over. At least the fear would stop. She waited until lunchtime. Then, she walked to the main office. The secretary was busy typing on a computer. Can I help you, sweetie? She asked, without looking up. I need to withdraw from the talent show, Alina said. Her voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. The secretary stopped typing and looked at her over her glasses. The show is tomorrow night. Are you sure? Mrs. Sterling has you listed as a soloist. I'm sure, Alina said, reaching for the clipboard. I can't do it. All right, the secretary sighed, opening a drawer to find the withdrawal form. Here, fill this out and have Mrs. Sterling sign it. You know she's going to be upset. She hates changes to the program. Alina took the paper. It was a bright yellow sheet. Drop ad request, it said at the top. She stared at the blank lines. She had to write her name. She had to write the reason. Lack of skill, she thought in her head. Fear. Thank you, Alina whispered. She turned and walked out of the office. She walked down the hallway, the paper crinkling in her hand. She wasn't heading toward the music room to get the signature, though. She was heading toward the exit to go home and hide. But something made her stop. The hallway that led to the auditorium was on her left. The big double doors were closed. She looked at the yellow paper in her hand. If she dropped out now, she would never know. She would always wonder what if. But staying in meant facing Mrs. Sterling again. It meant facing that impossible music. Alina stood in the hallway, frozen. The school was mostly empty because everyone was at lunch. It was quiet. Then she heard a sound. A piano sound. It was coming from the auditorium. The doors were open, just a crack. Someone was playing. Alina peeked through the crack. It wasn't Mrs. Sterling. Mrs. Sterling never played like that. This person was playing softly, gently. It was a student, maybe a senior from the jazz band. He was improvising, just playing whatever came into his head. He wasn't reading music. He was just feeling it. Alina watched his hands. They weren't moving fast. They were moving smoothly. He looked so relaxed. He wasn't thinking about rules or scales. He was just talking with the piano then. He stopped, packed up his bag, and left through the side door near the stage. The auditorium was empty again. Alina looked at the yellow withdrawal form in her hand. Then she looked through the crack at the stage. The grand piano was sitting there in the dim light, It looked lonely. It looked like it was waiting for her. She knew she should leave. She should go find Mrs. Sterling and get the signature and end this nightmare. Her brain was telling her to run, but her feet moved the other way. She pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The air smelled like wood polish and old dust. It was quiet, peaceful. Alina walked down the aisle, her sneakers squeaking on the floor. She walked up the steps and onto the stage. The piano looked huge. She sat down on the bench. It was cold. She put the yellow withdrawal form on the music rack. Then she looked at the sheet music for the Chopin piece. She hated it. She hated every... Elena's fingers hovered over the white keys for just a second. Trembling slightly from the adrenaline of throwing the music on the floor, she felt like she was standing on a cliff edge ready to jump. She closed her eyes again, shutting out the dusty stage, the empty seats, and the pressure of Mrs. Sterling. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the smell of old wood and varnish, and then she let her hands drop. The first note she struck wasn't a gentle one. It was a low, deep C on the left hand, played hard enough to make the piano vibrate against her ribs. It wasn't the polished sound of a classical concert. It was a punch. It was the sound of the frustration she had been holding inside for weeks. She didn't play the Chopin piece. She played her song. It started slow, a lonely melody in the middle register that sounded like a question. Asterisk, why am I here? Why isn't this enough? Asterisk at first, her fingers felt stiff. The grand piano was heavy, much heavier than the old upright she was used to. She had to push the weight of the keys down, using muscles in her arms that she didn't know she had. Mrs. Sterling had told her she was weak. But as Alina pressed into the keys, she realized she wasn't weak. She was just holding back. Now, she wasn't holding back. She let the melody wander. It wasn't structured like a pop song with a verse and a chorus. It was like a river. It flowed where it wanted to go. She thought about her dad coming home late, grease under his fingernails. He's too tired to talk, but always ruffling her hair before bed. The music became softer, warmer. She thought about her mom scrubbing floors, her hands red and raw, but always smiling when she made Elena's favorite soup. The music swelled, getting a little louder, a little faster. Alina forgot where she was. She forgot she was sitting in a school auditorium. In her mind, she was back in her living room, safe. But then, the image of Mrs. Sterling's face flashed in her mind. The cold look, the sneer when she saw Elena's clothes. The music changed. The left hand started playing a rhythmic, thumping bass. It wasn't smooth anymore. It was jagged. It was angry. She started hitting the keys harder. The sound echoed off the high ceiling of the auditorium, bouncing off the walls and coming back to her like a wave. It was a loud, defiant noise. I am not a nobody, the music seemed to say. I am here. Tears leaked out of the corners of her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. She didn't need to see the keys. She knew where they were by heart. Her right hand started to climb up the keyboard, playing fast, running notes that sounded like rain pelting against a tin roof. She was improvising now, making it up as she went along. She was taking the fear she felt and turning it into sound. She remembered the feeling of the other students laughing at her. She remembered the feeling of being poor, of wearing the same hoodie every day, of never fitting in. She poured all of that loneliness into the high notes, making them cry out in a piercing, beautiful wail. The piano, which had felt like an enemy under Mrs. Sterling's watch, suddenly felt like a friend. The heavy action of the keys made her work for every note, but it gave her a big, rich sound in return. It was powerful. It felt like she was conducting a storm, but she was the one in control of the lightning. She wasn't reading black dots on a page. She was speaking from her heart, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was actually being heard. She played on and on, losing track of time. The song shifted again, moving from the angry storm back to a sad, quiet acceptance. The notes slowed down. They became gentle again. It was a sigh. It was a reconciliation with who she was, a girl who wasn't perfect, a girl who couldn't read music, but a girl who had something to say, She was so lost in the music that she didn't hear the side door near. The back of the auditorium opened quietly. She didn't see the two figures step out of the shadows and stand in the aisle. Watching her, Mr. Graves, the drama teacher, had been walking by with Principal Holloway. They had been discussing the lighting cues for the talent show when they heard the piano. At first, they thought it was a recording. It was too full, too emotional. But then they realized someone was actually in there, playing live. They stopped walking. Mr. Graves held his breath. He knew every student in the drama department, and he knew the music students. He knew the girl who played the flute and the boy who played the drums. But he didn't know this girl. He couldn't see her face clearly because she was hunched over the keys, her body swaying with the music. He just saw the faded blue hoodie. He listened to the way the melody built up, the raw emotion in it. It wasn't technically perfect. There were moments where her timing was a little loose. A note here or there that wasn't quite clean, but it didn't matter. It had something that most of the perfect students lacked. It had soul. It sounded like a real human feeling. Bleeding out through the instrument, Principal Holloway stood with her arms crossed, a look of surprise on her face. She was used to hearing the standard, polished routines every year. This was different. This was intense. She looked at Mr. Graves and raised an eyebrow, as if to ask, "Asterisk, who is that?" Asterisk. They stood there silently in the dark for 10 minutes. They didn't want to interrupt. They could feel the energy coming from the stage. It was electric. On stage, Alina was reaching the end of her song. She could feel the energy draining out of her arms. She was sweating, her hair sticking to her forehead. She played one final sweeping chord with both hands, letting the notes hang in the air a bright, hopeful sound that rang out like a bell. She held her hands down on the keys, letting the sound vibrate through her body. Then, slowly, she lifted her fingers off the keyboard. The silence that rushed back into the auditorium was heavy, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind of silence that happens after something important has been said. The air felt charged. Alina sat there, breathing hard. Her shoulders slumped. She felt exhausted, but in a good way. She felt like she had just lifted a giant weight off her chest. She stared at the black and white keys, waiting for her heart to stop pounding. She slowly opened her eyes. The stage lights were still off, and the room was dim. She looked down at the floor where she had thrown Mrs. Sterling's sheet music. It was lying there, face down on the dusty floorboards. A small smile touched her lips. She felt different. She wasn't the scared girl who walked into the office 5 minutes ago to quit. She wasn't the girl who was afraid of Mrs. Sterling. She knew she wasn't going to quit. She didn't know if she was going to win. She didn't know if she would ever be a great pianist, but she knew she belonged on that stage. She knew that her music was real. She started to reach down to pick up the sheet music, thinking she should probably put it back on the rack so she wouldn't get in trouble. Then, from the darkness of the auditorium, a voice spoke. That was incredible. Alina jumped. She nearly fell off the bench. Her heart, which had just started to slow down, kicked into high gear again. She looked out into the darkness, squinting. "Who's there?" 2 figures walked up the center aisle toward the stage. As they got closer to the dim lights spilling from the exit signs, Alina recognized them. It was Mr. Graves, the drama teacher who usually wore paint-splattered shirts, and Principal Holloway. Alina froze. She felt a wave of panic. She wasn't supposed to be in here without Mrs. Sterling, and she definitely wasn't supposed to be banging on the expensive piano. I'm sorry," she stammered, standing up quickly. "I was just leaving. I didn't mean to disturb anyone." Mr. Graves walked up the steps onto the stage, shaking his head. "Don't be sorry, Alina. Don't be sorry at all." He had a strange look on his face, a mix of awe and curiosity. "I didn't know you played like that." Principal Holloway joined him on the stage. She looked at Alina, really looked at her, not just as a student in a hoodie, but as a person. "That was you playing? Just now?" Alina nodded, clutching her hands together nervously. "Yes, ma'am. I was just messing around." "I wasn't messing around," Mr. Graves said firmly. "That was music. I've never heard anything like that in this school before. It was raw. It was intense. Elena felt her face get hot. She looked at the floor. Thank you, but it's not the chop-in piece. Mrs. Sterling says I have to play the chop-in piece. Principal Holloway sighed. She walked over to the bench where the yellow withdrawal form was still sitting. She picked it up and looked at it. You were going to quit? Yes, Elena whispered, because I can't do the other piece. And Mrs. Sterling says I'm not good enough. Mr. Graves frowned. Mrs. Sterling has a very specific idea of what music is. She thinks it's about following rules. What you just did, that was about breaking them. In the best way possible. He looked at Principal Holloway. You know, Mrs. Sterling has the final say on the classical categories, technically. But the talent show is for the school. It's for showcasing the students we have. Principal Holloway looked at the crumpled sheet music on the floor. Then back at Elena. She saw the fear in the girl's eyes. The fear of being told she wasn't good enough again. The principal remembered what it was like to be young and to have a dream that nobody else understood. Now, Principal Holloway said softly, we have an open performance slot in the second half of the show. It's for students who want to do something original or something that doesn't fit into the classical categories. Nobody has signed up for it yet. She looked at Mr. Graves, then back at Elena. If you wanted to play this song you just play. The night of the talent showcase arrived faster than Elena wanted. The school gymnasium, which usually smelled like old sneakers and floor wax, had been transformed. There were bright spotlights shining down on the stage, and the chairs were filled with parents, teachers, and students. The air buzzed with excitement and the smell of popcorn. Backstage, however, it was pure chaos. Students were rushing around, tuning instruments, fixing their hair, and hyping themselves up. Elena sat on a wooden crate in the corner, hugging her knees to her chest. She was still wearing her faded jeans, but she had traded her old hoodie for a clean, white button-down shirt her mom had ironed for her. It felt a bit stiff, but it was the best she had. She felt like she was going to throw up. Her hands were sweating so much she had to keep wiping them on her jeans. Mrs. Sterling was pacing back and forth nearby, holding a clipboard and looking like a general about to go to war. She stopped in front of Elena and glared. I hope you practiced those scales, Lena. Because if you go out there and butcher that chop-in piece like you did in rehearsal, I will personally make sure you never touch a school instrument again. Do you understand me? Elena looked up. For the first time, she wasn't scared of Mrs. Sterling. She felt a strange sort of calm. She knew something Mrs. Sterling didn't. Yes, Mrs. Sterling, she said quietly. I understand. Good, you're on in 10 minutes. And don't you dare freeze up. Mrs. Sterling walked away to yell at a trumpet player. Elena took a deep breath. She reached into her pocket and touched the folded piece of paper where the chop-in music was. She wasn't going to use it. She had her own plan. The show started. The curtains opened and the audience cheered. First came the choir, singing a pop song that everyone clapped along to. Then came the jugglers, and then the girl who played the violin perfectly. Every time someone finished, the clapping was loud. Elena watched from the shadows of the wings, her heart beating faster and faster. Finally, it was time for the intermission. The crew moved the grand piano to the center of the stage. It looked shiny and menacing under the bright lights. Elena watched them slide it into place. It felt like watching an executioner setting up a guillotine. But then, Principal Holloway walked by. She stopped next to Elena and gave her a small, secret wink. You've got this, she whispered. Then the host of the show, a senior named Kevin, walked back to the microphone after the intermission. Okay, everyone, welcome back, he said. For our next performance, we have a special treat. Usually we stick to the program, but we had a last-minute addition to the open performance slot. Please welcome Elena Rodriguez. Mrs. Sterling, who was standing near the curtain, froze. She looked at Kevin with confusion, then at Elena. Open performance? She hissed. What is she doing? She's supposed to play the etude. Elena didn't wait for her to answer. She took a breath, stood up, and walked toward the bright light. The walk from the darkness of the wings to the spotlight was the longest walk of her life. The applause was polite, but confused. Most people didn't know who she was. She could see hundreds of faces staring at her. She saw her parents sitting in the third row. Her dad had a huge, proud smile on his face, and her mom was holding a tissue, already crying. Seeing them gave her the courage to keep moving. She sat down at the piano. The bench felt slippery. She adjusted it, like she had seen the professionals do. She looked out at the audience. The lights were blinding her, so she couldn't see their faces clearly, just a sea of dark shapes. She could feel Mrs. Sterling standing in the wings, watching her like a hawk, waiting for her to mess up. Alina put her hands on the keys. She didn't put any sheet music on the rack. It was bare. She heard a few murmurs from the audience. "Where's the music?" Someone whispered. She closed her eyes. She blocked out the lights, the murmurs, Mrs. Sterling. She thought back to the rainy afternoon in the empty auditorium. She thought about the anger and the sadness she had felt. She let all that emotion rise up in her chest. Then she began to play. She started with the same low, deep note she had played before. Thud. It rang out through the gymnasium, silencing the whispers instantly. Then her right hand came in, playing a melody that was simple but sad. It wasn't the fast, complicated song Mrs. Sterling wanted. It was Elena's song. It was slow at first, tentative. It sounded like a person waking up in the dark and realizing they are alone. As she played, she forgot about the technique Mrs. Sterling had lectured her about. She didn't care about keeping her wrists perfectly straight. She played the way she felt. She pressed the keys harder, the music getting faster. It sounded like a storm gathering wind. The low notes in the left hand began to pound, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. The melody shifted, becoming angrier, sharper. It was the sound of frustration. It was the sound of being told you aren't good enough. The audience was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Usually at these school shows, people coughed or whispered to their neighbors. Not now. Everyone was staring at the girl in the white shirt, pouring her heart out. They weren't hearing a student trying to pass a test. They were hearing a human being telling a story. On the side of the stage, Mrs. Sterling's mouth fell open. She looked at the piano, then at Alina. She had expected a clumsy, failed attempt at classical music. She hadn't expected this. This was powerful. This was real, and she hated that she couldn't stop it. Elena's hands were flying now. She was sweating, her hair sticking to her forehead, but she didn't stop. She was standing on the pedals to make the sound sustain longer, making the piano roar. The music filled the whole gym, bouncing off the walls. It was beautiful, but it was also painful. It hurt to listen to because it was so honest. Then, slowly, she brought the volume down. The storm was passing. The notes became gentle again, soft and flowing. It was like the sun coming out after the rain. She played a final rising sequence of notes that sounded hopeful, like a bird taking flight. She reached the high C and held it, letting it ring out until the sound naturally faded into silence. Alina lifted her hands off the keys. She sat there for a second, her chest heaving, waiting for her ears to stop ringing. There was a pause. Just a split second of silence. Then, explosion. The applause didn't start slow. It erupted all at once. It was a wall of noise. People in the front row stood up immediately. Alina saw her dad jumping up and down, clapping his hands raw. Her mom was crying openly now. Within seconds, the whole gym was standing. The cheering was so loud it rattled the windows on the stage. Someone even whistled. Alina sat there, stunned. She looked into the audience, blinking against the lights. They were cheering for her. She slowly stood up. She felt wobbly like a newborn deer. She walked to the center of the stage and bowed. She wasn't very good at bowing. She almost tipped over, but the audience didn't care. They cheered louder. They didn't care that she wasn't wearing a fancy dress. They didn't care that she couldn't read music. They only cared that she moved them as she walked off the stage. The applause was still going strong. She stepped into the wings, her legs feeling like jelly. The first person to greet her wasn't Mrs. Sterling. It was Principal Holloway. The principal grabbed Elena's hands and squeezed them. "Alina," she said loudly over the noise, "that was the most beautiful thing I have heard in years. You have a gift." Before Alina could say anything, She felt a tap on her shoulder. It was Mr. Graves, the drama teacher. He was beaming. "I told you," he said. "I told you they would listen," and the crowd parted. Mrs. Sterling was standing there. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked small. Her arms were crossed, but her face was pale. She looked at Alina for a long time. "It wasn't the choppin'," Mrs. Sterling said finally. Her voice was quiet. "No, ma'am," Alina said, meeting her eyes. "It wasn't." Mrs. Sterling looked down at her clipboard. "It was sloppy. Your technique was terrible. You broke almost every rule of piano playing." Alina held her breath. However, Mrs. Sterling sighed, almost like it hurt her to say it. "It was effective," the audience responded. "That is more than I can say for half the students in my honors class." She turned to walk away, but then she stopped. She looked back over her shoulder. "You have a natural ear, Alina, a very strong one. If you ever actually want to learn how to read music and play properly, come to my office next week. I suppose I could fit you in on Tuesdays? Before school?" With that, Mrs. Sterling walked away, her head held high. Alina stood there, her mouth open. Did Mrs. Sterling just offer her lessons? The woman who set her up to fail was now asking her to join the class? Alina felt a laugh bubbling up inside her. It was too weird, but the night wasn't over yet. A woman in a smart suit walked over to Alina. Alina didn't recognize her. She looked important. "Hello, Alina," the woman said, shaking her hand. "I am Mrs. Vance. I'm with the City Arts Foundation." "Hello," Alina said shyly. "I was in the audience tonight," Mrs. Vance said. "We have a scholarship program for young musicians who show exceptional promise and unique voice. It covers private lessons, a new instrument if you need one, and tuition to the summer music camp upstate." Alina's heart skipped a beat. Summer camp. "But I don't have any money. That's what a scholarship is for." Mrs. Vance smiled warmly. "I've never heard a student play with such emotion before. We would love to sponsor you. If you are interested? Alina felt lick.